All right, y'all. So I apologize in advance if you guys are not super enthusiastic about me covering a little bit more, but I really want to get maybe a little bit through the nervous system. Whatever I think is important, I'll probably just throw into a Kahoot. But just bear with me. We're going to try to get through just a little bit more of the book. We're almost done. I think this will be really the last system we cover. We probably will not get to the reproductive system. But like I said, you can just either read the book for yourself or study it, check the internet or whatever if you want to learn more about any of the systems we've talked about. There's a whole wealth of information out there. All right, so let's get into chapter 24 on communication. We're covering the nervous system first. Okay, so all right, so the nervous system is made up of two different systems, primarily the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so the central nervous system, or the CNS, is composed mainly of the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, and the central nervous system's job is to process the information that's gathered from everywhere, all around the body. Okay, your sensory input all goes to the CNS, even your critical thinking, language processing, all of that is taken care of by the CNS. And let's talk about, the tissue that the central nervous system is made out of. It's called nervous tissue. Okay, nervous tissue. All right, nervous tissue. And it is naturally gray, a pinkish, grayish color, which is why it is often called gray matter. Okay, gray matter. And some of y'all might smell gray, Grey, or Gray. Either way, it doesn't really matter. They're both valid ways of spelling the color. Anyway, the gray matter is composed mostly of nerve cell bodies. Okay, and we'll talk about those in a minute. Axon terminals, so where the axons actually terminate, is in the gray matter. The majority of all nerve synapses are located within the gray matter. And then if you look at a kind of a cutout of what the spinal cord looks like, or even what the brain looks like, you'll see that it is like this butterfly-shaped, well, it's kind of a strange-looking butterfly, but you know what I mean. A butterfly-shaped portion of the spinal cord is gray, and that's the gray matter. Okay, and then what's this white matter? Okay, the white matter are bundles of axons, which are primarily involved in communicating with different parts of the nervous system and different parts of the nervous system. They're where all of the axons are, bundles of axons. And you see these nerves coming in here and attached to the spinal cord, and that's where these axons kind of all feed into those nerve cells, or those nerve bundles there. All right, and so the white matter or basically the thing that gives white matter its color, and also is kind of a protective coating around the central nervous system, are called the meninges collectively. Okay, you have a very thin layer that runs all around and kind of articulates the very edge of the spinal cord and the brain, and this is called the pia mater. Okay, so pia mater, not mater, pia mater. And then you have connecting the pia mater to the exterior, these little spiderweb looking strands here, but what they connect to is known as the arachnoid mater. Okay, arachnoid mater. And the reason that they call it the arachnoid is because that's similar to spiders, and they thought this kind of looked like a spider web connection here. So arachnoid. And then you have on the very outside the very, very tough and durable dura mater. Okay, so dura mater. And that kind of forms the protective case around the central nervous system. All right. At the same time, you have cerebrospinal fluid, okay, which is created in special capillaries in the pia mater, and they only allow certain substances to move in from the blood in between spaces between the arachnoid mater and the dura mater. So there's cerebrospinal fluid all in through here. It also can get in here as well if it needs to. Basically, the purpose of cerebrospinal fluid is to bathe the central nervous system It will provide nutrition to the nervous cells. It cushions the structures. It removes waste. It's good. You have to keep your spinal cord and brain clean and free of waste, because that's one of the probably, if not the most critical organ. I would say the brain, any nervous tissue. If you don't have, I will say the brain and the nervous tissue are probably the most important organs, because without them, you can't get your heart to beat. Without your heart beating, you're not going to live very long or breathe. Okay, so but everything's connected. But it's important that you keep the brain clean. So the excess cerebrospinal fluid actually exits through the top of the brain in the arachnoid mater, and that allows just there to be the right amount of cerebrospinal fluid at all times. That way you don't have just tons and tons of cerebrospinal fluid in there, and you'll get swelling, and that can be bad as well. Okay, so the next part of the nervous system is the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so the peripheral nervous system is composed of a couple different divisions. It has a sensory division, which basically is what gathers information. Okay, so your sensory division, I need to include that probably. The sensory division gathers stuff. Okay, and then there's the motor division, which acts upon the sensory division's kind of command or the demand of the central nervous system. So the sensory division is composed of various sensory organs, which we're going to talk about the different senses, but they gather information from around your body and send that information to the central nervous system, and then the central nervous system processes those requests. And then what happens is the CNS basically relays that information to the motor division, which then in turn takes the information to what are called effectors. Okay, effectors. And to effect something means to bring about something. Okay, so they're the ones who are actually performing the action. They're usually muscles or glands or some other type of organ. Could be the it could be smooth muscle, it could be cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle, whatever, or even sensory, something from maybe the brain to the liver, even something that you're not even aware of, but internal organs, or like the bladder, even would be another thing of that. Although the bladder itself is surrounded with muscle, and so. Anyway, the effectors actually end up bringing about a certain result, okay? So there are things that you can control in the nervous system, and what you can control, those nerves that go to the things that you can control, like skeletal muscle, those things would be considered part of the somatic nervous system. So somatic means you can control that, all right? Voluntary is another term for it. It's voluntary. And then you have involuntary nervous system actions, which those are carried out by the autonomic nervous system. Okay, so what you can't or you don't control is carried out by your autonomic nervous system. All right, and then let's talk about the different types of neurons. So neurons come in different shapes and sizes, long and short. These are two different neurons here. Nerve cells are also called neurons, okay, and they're composed of mainly three parts, okay. They have what is called a body, a cell body, and this is like what you think of when you consider, if we think of a single cell, we really think of just it being this. It's where the nucleus is, it's where all of the major proteins that work together to keep that cell healthy are inside of the cell body. And then you have this long extension which makes a neuron special, which is called the axon. Okay, the axon is this long strand that runs the length of the entire cell. And then you have these branch-like structures at either end of the axon or near the cell body, which are called these are called dendrites. Okay, so dendrites are what those are called. So They have different names. Like this is a multipolar cell. Looks like a pseudo unipolar, although it's maybe too close to the middle here. But they come in all different shapes and sizes. But those are the main parts of that are the cell body, the dendrites, and the axons themselves. Now, the axons might be sheathed in this coating right here. These little coats right here that look like sausages, kind of on there. These are myelin sheaths, okay? Myelin sheaths, okay? So myelin is a coating that covers these axons and actually helps with nerve impulse propagation. All right, but that's what the basic anatomy of a neuron is. All right, so let's move on to the brain. All right, so we're now here at the brain. All right, so this is a midway cut through the brain, and we're just going to look at one or both halves of the brain. There are two halves or hemispheres of the brain, a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere. Okay, the right half of the brain basically controls the skeletal motion of the left side of the body, and the left half of the brain controls the right skeletal movement of the body. Okay, so the brain is made up of several parts. We're only going to cover a few of them. Mainly, we got the cerebrum, okay, which is the largest part of the brain. Okay, the largest part of the brain is this pink area right here, the cerebrum. Okay, cerebrum. All right, it controls conscious activity. All right. These little areas in here, these little lines, are called gyri, or G-Y-R-I, or singular would be gyrus. So you have some come right across the middle, like this is this is what's called the pre-central gyrus and the post-central gyrus right here. And this is, I think, a sulcus, but we're not going to really cover that. Anyway, the cerebrum does conscious activity. It's the largest portion, and it's made up of 4 individual lobes. Okay, so you have what is called the frontal lobe here at the front. Okay, it does mental functions like reasoning, planning, memorizing. It aids in verbal communication, and it starts the commands for voluntary body movement. So if you think to yourself, oh, I'm going to move my arm, well, your frontal lobe is actually what initiates that movement. Now, how it actually moves, that's ultimately going to be controlled by your cerebellum, but we'll get to that. Okay, so after your frontal lobe, you got your parietal lobe towards the back, all right? And this is for both halves, remember. So you have the frontal, this is just for one half of the brain, but this other half would also be considered frontal lobe. Each half of the brain has a frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal lobe, right? But the parietal lobe right here, it's sensitive to pain and detects pressure, touch, temperature, and its job is to take that information and forward it to the frontal lobe. I abbreviated that FL. Okay, so it takes it and forwards that information to the frontal lobe, which is where you do your reasoning centers are, where you just kind of process that and figure out what to do with that information. And then also what the parietal lobe does is it helps to maintain a sense of body position. Okay, so it senses where your body is located in space. You sit right there where you're at and just think about where your body is. Where are your arms at? Where are your legs at? Where is your trunk? Where is your where are you sitting itself? Like the feeling of being in the seat, your general position. You can hide your hand underneath your desk, but you know your hand is still there. You have a general sense of where that hand is because of your parietal lobe. Okay, so that's what your parietal lobe does. Next is your occipital lobe. That's towards the back. The occipital lobe is responsible for vision. Oc means for vision related. So it's related to vision, and it also aids you in memorizing objects and symbols. All right. If you have the sensation that you're seeing stars, like if you get hit in the head or something and you start to see stars, That's because the nerves that run to the occipital lobe have been stimulated, and anytime a nerve impulse reaches the occipital lobe from those nerves, it interprets it as visual stimuli. So your brain processes that as a actual visual occurrence above it. So that's the job of the occipital lobe. Next, you have the temporal lobe. Right. So the temporal lobe, its job is to receive the sensations of smelling and of hearing, and it also helps us remember word pronunciation, like temporal and pronunciation, and any word that might be difficult to pronounce. It helps us remember that. It helps us remember like melody from songs and stuff, and also we can also store lots of sight and sound memory there in the temporal lobe, so it's on the side. And you might remember that the bone that's right on the side there is called the temporal bone, right? And there's the bone of the skull that actually covers the occipital dome is, you can guess it, you probably can guess it, is the occipital bone. And there's the parietal bone, and there's also frontal bone, and each one of those bones of the skull covers up a certain lobe of the cerebrum. Okay, so that's the cerebrum. There are 4 different lobes there. Okay, and we move on to the thalamus. All right, so the thalamus right here. Okay, the thalamus, its job is to basically receive and interpret general sensations. This is just like everything that's basically going on in the room right now. Related some to smell, some to hearing, but it basically interprets some of those and filters it. It kind of serves as a filter. The important ones end up going to the cerebrum, where you can start to think about whether or not you want to act upon those smells. Like, for instance, you walk into the room and you feel a certain temperature, and so and you think to yourself, oh, it's cold in here, or oh, it's warm in here, but eventually your body kind of adapts, so you're not always constantly thinking it's cold, unless it's uncomfortable. And if it's uncomfortable, then then that information is deemed important enough to be sent to the cerebrum. But the thalamus also helps keep you awake and alert, because it basically reminds you that the stimuli around you is changing, and it keeps you aware of that. So you're awake and alert because of your thalamus. Then you have your hypothalamus. So hypo means below, so this is the hypothalamus. It's underneath the thalamus. The hypothalamus regulates a lot of involuntary activities, especially like things like body temperature, how much fluid is in your blood. It helps your kidneys and your renal arteries contract and dilate based on to get rid of. If you have too much blood, you need to remove some water from your blood. It'll help with that. Fluid balance, it does that, which is related to it. It links the nervous system with the endocrine system, which is one of the most important jobs that the hypothalamus has. And so, yes, its job is a lot of involuntary stuff. Like if you eat a meal and you need insulin and glucagon, or insulin or glucagon from your pancreas. Well, your hypothalamus is the one that basically links up with the nervous system. We'll get to it, but it's the thyroid and the rest of the endocrine system. Once we get there, we'll discuss those organs. All right. So next is the cerebellum, which is the small salami-looking organ at the base of the brain. And its job is to do body coordination. So walking, running, swimming, any kind of athletic event that you basically train for and condition your body to become coordinated for. Your cerebellum is the organ that is responsible for you being able to do that. And basically its job is to take generalized signals from the other brain regions and basically refine them into fine motor coordination. There's gross motor coordination, but the cerebellum really helps to regulate quickness and force. So, if you slam your hand onto the desk, or it's like if you want to gently place like a book down, how does your brain know how to throw it, whether to throw it down very hard or just simply let it down softly, how much force to actually apply, and contract your muscles to a certain degree to allow you to lay that thing down gently. Your cerebellum allows that. Or if you want to hit something very hard, it also will do that as well. It's not just soft things, but basically your cerebellum tells your other your cerebrum or other brain regions to chill whenever they send really gross. When I say gross, I don't mean like disgusting. I mean like large impulses to create force, and basically decides whether or not it needs to be tapered back a little bit. And then you have, besides your cerebellum, below you have your brain stem, okay, which is super important. In fact, if you get a wound to your brain stem, it's pretty much fatal because it's involved with involuntary respiration, so it helps control your breathing, your blood vessel size, so increasing or decreasing in cross-sectional area, that will be controlled by the brainstem, and then the heart rate is also controlled by the brainstem. So it has a lot of homeostatic processes that it controls. So you can understand that if you lose this guy, you lose pretty much your life. Okay, pretty much guaranteed. Okay, it also works to maintain your posture. So the current posture you're holding right now is caused by your brainstem, basically helping you hold that position. Okay, so you have your parietal lobes and your cerebrum, which help maintain where your body is. Your cerebellum, which actually coordinates your body to be in that position. But then when you're there, your brainstem helps you maintain that position. All right. And then eyeball movement, and interestingly enough, the actual movement of your eyes is controlled by your brainstem, because the movement of your eyes is not controlled. Not by, you might think, oh, it's controlled by the occipital lobe because that's where the eyeballs connect. No, it's actually the eyeballs move because there are muscles in the eye sockets that move the eye back and forth, and so those muscles are controlled by the brainstem. And also, it helps you respond to sight and sound. Okay, so it moves your eyeballs towards a certain sound or a certain sight. It catches your eye. That is what the brainstem does. Okay, so these are the general parts of the brain that I would like you to know. Just comes, and then a couple maybe of the more generalized processes that these things carry out. So I'll make sure that everything that's important will be on the Kahoot. Just remember that everything that I think that you should know will be on that Kahoot. All right, so we're going to go to the next section. Before I move on, once I do want to again bring up the fact that I said your brain is separated into two hemispheres. Okay, so you have two hemispheres of the brain, a right and left, and the wires are kind of crossed. So, well, that's not really super good, but okay. So the left portion of your brain. Okay, if I'm going to make another brain right here. I'm not very good at drawing brains. Okay, here's the spinal cord. So the left side of your brain basically controls the right half of your body. The right side of your brain controls. The right side of your brain controls the left side of your body. If this is the spinal cord right here, right, and this is the left side of your body. This is the right side. This is the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain. So the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, and the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. And each one of these halves is called a hemisphere. Okay? And actually, your brain is separated by something that's called the corpus callosum. You don't need to know that, but that's like the ridge that's in the middle. It helps the two halves communicate. But if you sever that, there's a lack of communication. Some really weird things can happen. We might look at a video as to what can happen with that. But kind of a neat thing that can happen, kind of a strange, odd thing can happen if the brain isn't able to communicate with its other half. But yeah, all right. So, within the confines of the autonomic nervous system, okay, so let's make a quick little branch right here. Okay, so we have the nervous system. Okay, and then that is divided into the central nervous system right? And we also have the peripheral nervous system. Okay, the peripheral nervous system is also split into somatic, which we can control like skeletal muscles. Okay, and then you have the autonomic. Which you can't really control, and then the autonomic is further divided into parasympathetic, and then I'll make this down here, but this is sympathetic. Okay, so sympathetic and parasympathetic make up the autonomic nervous system. These are the two new terms. I need to make that better. Sympathetic. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about today. So the parasympathetic nervous system, its job basically is to operate within the confines of things that you really never have a real control over.